Here with us to talk about immigration reform and other key issues facing Congress are U.S. Representatives Henry Cuellar, a Democrat from Texas, and Tim Huelskamp, a Republican from Kansas. Welcome, Congressman.
Thank you so much, Colleen.
And Representative Cuellar, I'll start with you. You've been a strong proponent of the pathway to citizenship, but also of border security, but you've been very clear that you don't like the piecemeal approach that seems to be favored in the House right now. Why is it so important to do it all in one bill?
Well, I certainly prefer the comprehensive approach, but again, if the practical aspect in the Republican House is to do a piecemeal, I'll support the piecemeal approach, as long as we do three things. One, have strong border security. I live on the border, so I'm very familiar with the border. Number two, some sort of guest worker plan, so people that want to come and work here legally then can go back to their countries. And number three, whether we call it a pathway, we can compromise and call it legalization of the 11 or 12, where they can travel and they can work. And then, without setting a pathway to citizenship, as long as the legal system that we have in place can move them up to citizenship and don't set up any barriers, I think that would be a good compromise to look at immigration reform.
And how do you answer those who say that's just encouraging people to continue breaking the law and it's basically just amnesty?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't support amnesty like President Reagan and the Democrats did in 1986. That was amnesty. I don't support amnesty on that, but I do want to look at the 11 or 12 that are here, and without setting a pathway to legalization, I think it's our own national interest that we know who those people are. I want to know who those people are. Not all of them are going to stay here, because if they have a criminal record, I'll be the first one to go ahead and deport them. But I want to at least make those people legal, where they can work and they can travel. And then from there, whatever the legal system we have in place right now, the immigration, it can take them out of that status that we're talking about.
And Representative Huelskamp, you have been pretty strong in your focus on border security, and the bishops are very much pushing this pathway to citizenship, but that's not, as I understand it, something you support. How do you square that with your Catholic faith? If the bishops are so strong saying we have to do this, it's a matter of justice and bringing people out of the shadows, how do you answer that?
Well, as you indicated at the beginning, it's an issue of prudential judgment, elected of folks that have to answer some pretty tough questions. And every nation has the responsibility, every elected representative has the responsibility to deal first with the border and the sovereignty as a nation. But I think most people agree, I think everybody in Congress would agree, we'd like to solve this now. And what happened back in 1986 was a failure to deal with the issue of border security. And as we understand the Senate bill, it would provide this pathway to citizenship without solving the border security issue first. Because once you draw the line in the sand, as it happened in 1986 or 1987 when it kicked in, immediately you start having another problem. So border security has to come first. And I want to also say what I hear from the bishops that I visit with, I mean, it's not a unanimous opinion there should be citizenship. It's something that most do agree. It's left up to elected officials. It's not like an issue of life or marriage or contraception. It's something that is left up to us. So it is difficult to sort out. I'll say personally, I have 2 adopted children who are immigrants to this country, and it's a mess. The system's broken. It's still basically built on 1950s idea. In 2013, we can improve it. Do we have to undo the whole thing? Probably not. I think we can make some positive changes, a piecemeal approach that would have more of a chance of actually passing into law.
And what would we do then with these 12 million who are here? We can't deport them all. I assume you wouldn't support doing that. So, how do you answer that question of this permanent underclass, that they're just sort of in the shadows, we don't quite know who they are?
Well, first, we have to make certain that the numbers aren't growing. That's why I believe, and many agree on the Republican side of Congress, that we should start with border security, make certain the border's secure, and then deal with the 11, 12, 13 million. But as Aristotle once said, seldom affirm, never deny, always distinguish. The 12 million had various characteristics. We have a small percentage are young folks that were brought here through no choice of their own, and then we have other folks in numerous other categories. And that's what I hear from most of my constituents. Is there's some folks that they say, hey, maybe a pathway to legalization might make sense for them. For others, there's a question about that. But again, what I see coming out the White House is you either give me a path to citizenship or we'll do nothing, which is why when the president had a House and the Senate controlled by the same party. They did nothing on immigration. And I would like to solve something and move in a way that makes sense long term, not just for the short term political game.
And Congressman Cuellar, you have talked about now being the opportune time, have to move on this now. But some would say now is not a good time because we're talking about possibly a new influx of low-wage, low-skilled workers at a time when the U.S. is already wrestling with unemployment. How do you answer that?
Well, first of all, my father was born in Guerrero, Tamaulipas. He became a legal resident, then he became a U.S. citizen. He followed the legal process. He was a migrant worker, and I can tell you there are some jobs here that Americans don't want to do. You know, sometimes the unions are the first ones to say, give the jobs to the Americans. Well, I'll say that to my union leaders. Go do that job in the hot sun, and because I can say that because my father and my mom did that. So first, we're talking about jobs that a lot of Americans don't want to do, quite honestly. First, give the jobs to the Americans, but not give them to whoever wants to work. But, you know, I think Tim and I can actually agree on this. You know, I believe in strong border security, but it's got to be sensible border security. I think I know the border pretty well since I lived there all my life. The other thing is you can't just talk about building a fence, because a fence is a 14th century solution to a 21st century problem. Because you can put a fence, for example, as an aspect of it, but keep in mind that 40% of the people that we have here came in through a legal permit, plane, a ship or some other way. So we got to look at internal security also, but we got to do it in a reasonable way.
And Representative Huelskamp, I want to shift just for a moment to an issue very much in the news, the rollout of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. You know, the White House calls it glitches. Others say, no, it's a much more catastrophic problem. But we're 3 weeks in, nearly a month in, folks not being able to sign up. Looks like it could be months before the problems are solved. Folks in both parties frustrated with the situation. Representative Huelskamp, you voted against Obamacare. Do you see this as an opening for a delay or repeal of it? Do you think that's realistic? That's what some folks in your party are talking about.
I think that would be a solution most everybody could agree on. Not everybody's going to agree with that. The rollout has been a failure. I'll say, personally, I've been online basically for 2 weeks trying to get in myself under Obamacare. As it passed, required all members of Congress to be in there, but the president's attempted to exempt members of Congress, and at the end of the day, I think it's unfair to make members of Congress and big businesses get out of Obamacare, and so that unfairness issue is playing out. But it would make sense if we delayed the individual mandate, which has some real serious religious liberty concerns, 77 lawsuits about that, including many Catholic associations. Little Sisters of the Poor is probably the best example, saying, you know, the mandate from the government violates the religious liberty, so let's have a delay in that individual mandate for a year, allow the administration another year to implement it. They've had 3 years. I don't believe they can get us set up to go in the next 2 or 3 months, and so I think that would be a good compromise. I don't know if the administration would do that. I would not be surprised if that happens. And again, there's a strong divide. I actually wasn't in Congress when it passed, but have voted multiple times to repeal it and also delay the individual mandate. So I think that would be a good compromise, and I think the White House is probably looking for anything to shift a little bit of the blame for this massive failure of a rollout.
And Representative Cuellar, we're almost out of time. You voted for Obamacare.
That is correct.
You have also indicated, though, some openness to changes in it. Now, would you consider among those supporting some of this legislation that would protect religious liberty, especially in the case of religious employers? And this is an issue that's been huge to the bishops. They've been arguably even more outspoken on this than on immigration. The idea that folks are being forced to pay for contraceptives and abortion-inducing drugs. I mean, where do you stand on the mandate, and would you be open to changes that would correct that issue?
First of all, I did support the law because in my area, 38% of, and some of my counties don't have insurance, so it's a very important insurance that we need to look at. Number one, keep in mind the website is only one medium to get a hold of, to sign up. You can do call centers, and in my areas, it's more the call and in person. So, but I do understand there's a problem with the website, and I think the enrollment, we ought to push that on, just like we passed the CR, we can do a CR in the enrollment part of it. But I do want to make some changes because, look, I think Republicans and Democrats are wrong in this aspect. Republicans are wrong when they want to repeal the whole thing. Democrats are wrong when they don't want to change one single word. We ought to look at what's good and get rid of the things that don't work. On the religious aspect, I've talked to James Tamayo, my bishop in my area, and certainly that's one of the changes and changes that we need to look at. The the Stubach Amendment, which we passed some years ago. But on the religious freedom, I'm certainly all with the bishops on that issue. So we keep the good things, and the things that we ought to change, repeal, modify, we ought to do that.
Representative Cuellar, Representative Huelskamp, we're out of time, but thank you both for joining me.
Thank you so much.